Hi, Adam. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good.
Yeah. Can you introduce yourself to our audience first before we start the interview?
Sure. Look at the camera?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can look at the camera.
Well, my name is Adam Savitt. I direct the China Policy Initiative at America First Policy Institute, AFPI. We're a nonprofit think tank. We were formed just after the first Trump administration, early 2021, mostly by cabinet level and senior White House officials from that administration. And we carry on the America First vision. The China Policy Initiative looks at the threat of China as a whole of society approach, meaning that not only the threat, the traditional kinetic threat, the military threat, but also surveillance, sabotage, transnational intimidation, acquiring our agricultural land and strategic sites. We treat it with a holistic view.
Yeah. You know, in United States, among the public figures, I didn't see in the political world talking a lot about the threat of China. We talked a lot about the benefits of having a trade partner like China. And I remember back in the 2000s when I was going to college, early 2000s, things were cheap because it was all made in China. But Donald Trump, President Trump now, has been on the forefront talking about the threats of China. And I feel like if it wasn't for President Trump, we might not have even had this kind of conversation. What do you think?
That's incredibly important. So what you're referring to is the early 2000s, late 1990s, but really the key was admitting China to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which gave them certain trade privileges, basically gave them the same privileges that other countries did, even though they had a closed economy, even though it was a communist government. And the hope was that opening up this huge market and engaging with this communist government would actually also open them up politically, make them more liberal politically. That did not happen. They successfully opened up their economy, which led to great prosperity, which led to people correctly say, and the regime correctly says, they lifted tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions from abject poverty to the middle class. It expanded their cities. People moved from rural to urban areas, but what it did not lead to is political liberalization. It only empowered and made the Communist Party richer. And now that Communist Party is building up its military, is building up its economic power, is creating a second pole away from the United States, and is trying to displace the United States.
Did the CCP plan that out from the get-go, that they wanted their current communism system in play while having a separate, capitalism, so to speak, in a controlled entity? Or did they change while it's going? Did they react and say, hey, we might have too many people going to the westernized world, that it's a danger to their own regime, and we got to do something about it? Was that planned out from the get-go, or was it kind of them going through their own, ups and downs and then adjusting themselves?
I think it's a mixture of the two, because of course all countries and all regimes are reacting to current events as they happen. I think it was a natural consequence that a country as big as China eventually would be seen as a good market for Western and other countries to try to access. And so eventually they would open up to the world. I guess it was a question, would those communist CCP leaders, how would they adjust to it? And as you're saying, I think they were astute in saying it was a risk for them to open up, but I think they successfully navigated increasing their police state, increasing their clampdown on the population, allowing no political dissent, but also just allowing enough freedom to allow for commerce in the way that we understand it, private corporations. But importantly, and this is biting them in the butt right now, which is that ultimately the Communist Party does control all commerce. So for example, like Jack Ma.
Jack Ma is gone. Where is he, man?
Well, he was disappeared and he was brought back. But he was one of the most prominent businessmen of Alibaba. And maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he disappeared. And now he's being rehabilitated a little bit, but it's all about the needs of the regime. So it's not a free market. It's still very brittle, not what we would recognize.
So Jack Ma doesn't control any of the Alibaba anymore? Is he out of the business scene? Because of his rhetoric, right? They didn't like, the CCP government did not like his rhetoric, right?
Yes, I don't know technically what his holdings are, or whether he has a controlling stake, or whether, I don't think he's in an executive position anymore.
Okay.
But let's just say he never really had control, because always the communist government is there and can seize it whenever they want. And any corporation of any size in China has members of the Communist Party who are sitting on the board. Okay, so they have full visibility in. They will, they'll veto any decision that is not to their advantage. So effectively, they control any private corporation.
Okay. Is it true that in China, so I've been hearing this story a lot, that people just disappear out of the blue, not just Jack Ma. Like you would see a neighbor, but one day you see them every day, like for years, and then one day they're gone.
Yeah.
And they might be victim of organ harvesting. Is this really true, or is this just a kind of a fictional story that we're seeing?
It's undoubtedly true. Like as far as numbers or as far as how frequently it happens, it's hard to say because China is a black box. You can't trust any numbers that are reported out of China or really any news that's reported out of China, including their economic numbers. But there's no doubt, and this is a particular day where we should be talking about this because the Falun Gong, who produced the Shen Yun dance organization,
which is amazing, right?
It is amazing, actually. It's just on artistic merits, it's amazing. But
even LA Times and mainstream media said there is such a great act.
It is, and it really is something. They highlight the fact this is China before communism, right? So the Chinese, when we criticize the Chinese Communist Party, we're not criticizing the people of China who have a wonderful civilization. The average people are wonderful as well. We're criticizing a particular regime which abuses and erases the past of China. That's kind of what this Shen Yun performance is trying to highlight. But recently, unfortunately, they've received bomb threats across the world. But just today, across the river in the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., this is an example of the long arm of Chinese transnational repression, we call it. But if that's what they can get away with here, intimidating people, death threat emails, etc. What they're doing in China, these Falun Gong folks who were dissenters in the 90s and early 2000s, this is where the organ harvesting concept came from. They were the guinea pigs of this, and it was terrible. At the peak, there was 100 million of them. They constituted a major threat to the Chinese regime, and China disappeared them. China imprisoned them. China took the organs. So yes, it is a police state. They will go after anyone they perceive as a political threat.
So many of them were victims of organ harvesting too, the people who are practicing Falun Gong, just because they practice Falun Gong. That's
correct. And the weird thing is that the Chinese regime was okay with Falun Gong at first because they saw that it was popular. They thought it was sort of connecting to people.
It's not a religion. Is it a religion, or it's more of a meditation thing, right?
Correct. The best I've heard, yes, it's like a meditation sort of mind state sort of thing. It's not a religion in the sense.
Like a Zen kind of similar situation.
Yes,
right?
It's not a Western religion in the sense. It's not an Abrahamic religion.
Which has been going on in Eastern culture for a long time in Asia, right?
Yeah, and. It is, but this particular one, and even the Chinese government embraced this at first because they thought it was a positive social movement. When they saw that it started to accrue some political power, and in China, political power can be anything popular that's not the government.
Yeah.
So sports, musical groups have been sanctioned because they're too popular. So this group Falun Gong,
like K-pop too, right?
K-pop, that's right.
Like they promote like femininity. They kind of suppress that too.
That's right. China gave guidelines against femininity in response to K-pop, and of course now China has their own boy bands. And they feel it's undermining the nature of society.
So it's not just Falun Gong; it's all aspects, whether it's K-pop or American entertainment. But they see more K-pop as a threat because they're more Asian, they're more relatable.
And I believe Korean TV as well will make its way into China. So, but with strict controls, because precisely, just like the Soviet Union before them, any outside culture, especially if it's attractive, especially if it distracts them from the Communist Party line, is a threat by definition.
So Falun, Xinyan,
yes.
Should we say the play or concert? That was supposed to be held in South Korea. I don't know whether you were familiar with that.
I didn't know that.
But the Korean government, because of the pressure from the CCP, they decided to ban this. What do you think about this, even though you just heard it from me?
What year was that, or what president?
This was last year.
So that was under President Yoon?
Under President Yoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the parliament has more power than President Yoon.
Listen, no democratic country, and of course South Korea is an important democratic ally, no democratic country should be taking directions from the CCP or any communist country. The thing is, the CCP is incredibly powerful because it has a strong economy, it has a strong military, it is so much closer to South Korea than it is to the United States.
Geographically.
So everyone understands this is hard not to be intimidated, but once they start with that, they'll be telling you to do everything politically, right? So it seems like a small thing, a dance recital essentially is what it is. But the Falun Gong have identified it's an important way to reach out. And the CCP have identified it undermines their narrative. So both find it important. And yeah, it's unfortunate that the government responded.
Should we regret ever trading with China?
That's a little too extreme, I think. China, I mean, it's a billion.
What's the moderate level of trading?
Yeah.
Because I don't think people talk about it that much. I mean, we're saying that we have to put a lot of tariffs, but do you think we have to drastically lower the trade situation with China and try to change those trade partners to other members of the international world?
So AFPI and the China Initiative, we believe very much in strategic decoupling. But your first question was very important because it seemed too broad to me. But you said, should we have ever traded with China? I mean, the problem is we pretty much can't completely cut it off. We can't. They're 1.4 billion. They're a huge portion of the world population, and they're becoming more industrious. They have huge industrial sectors that's hard to avoid. Yeah. But we should prioritize strategically. Starting with the highest level technology, the semiconductors, the quantum computing, these things that they need to build a high-tech society that unfortunately they used before we put on export controls on some semiconductors. They used that to build DeepSeek. Okay, so that's a very tangible example of us failing to strategically decouple and them getting a high-tech boost out of it. Now, when we're talking about shirts and shoes and toys, we can't really decouple, and we don't really need to. We say strategically, stop for the top and move down.
It seems like we created this, I don't want to use this word, but monster, so to speak. Like America has a lot to be held accountable to make this country the second largest economic GDP country, right? 18%, 19% of the entire world, and America's 25% is pretty much going neck and neck.
Yeah.
You mentioned DeepSeek.
Yes.
Do you think Americans should use it? In South Korea, they banned it recently. Do you think Americans should use it? Because some people have been saying it's much better than ChatGPT and Grok. What is your opinion about it?
I read about that in South Korea. I think it's going back and forth, right? I think it's being adjudicated in some way.
Is it going? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think temporarily it can't be downloaded, but people that have it can use it. But it should be controversial. It is controversial here. I personally don't think anyone should use it. I'm assuming it'll be precisely like TikTok. It'll be scraping data and of the user, and that's the best case if that's all they're doing. You're playing into, you're funding a adversary country developing a high-tech application that, for us it's kind of fun or useful or whatever, but it also it plays into defense technologies. It gives them the edge. So we should not be playing into that.
But when we talk about TikTok, so I have mixed feelings about it, like the same way as President Trump has too, because I remember when I was suppressed, being the first Korean American conservative commentator. I was the first, not because I wanted to be a conservative by default, because everything was so left-wing, the mainstream media, and pretty much all the Korean legacy media has been just adopting what NYT, WAPO, CNN, MSNBC has been spreading.
Yes.
So it's not just the media world. I'm talking about even social media world, like Facebook, Instagram, even Twitter back in the day when Jack Dorsey was at the helm.
Yes.
It was completely controlled, suppressed. Everybody felt it. We felt suppressed. We felt like we were in jail. I currently still do. I have a YouTube platform. I used to get 200,000 per episode back in 2020, but I've been demonetized, suppressed.
Yep.
And even under Trump admin, I mean, it didn't change. I think we had a session yesterday that talked about that Google's the worst. They don't. So that's why a lot of people gravitated towards, ironically, TikTok, because I saw a lot of conservative content coming out on TikTok, not on Facebook, not on YouTube, and I got it from TikTok.
Yes.
So isn't this the same situation with DeepSeek? And it's still a lot of conservatives still love TikTok too. While we're speaking.
Well, let's talk about TikTok first. Yeah, I mean, as someone who had read up on TikTok, we released research about TikTok. We advocated to be off government devices. We advocated for it to be divested or banned, exactly what was done. And of course, in Trump's first term, he used some presidential powers to try to shut it down. He, as it was guiding through the CFIUS process, Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, he tried to make a mitigation agreement that would either take care of the data problem, put the data in the United States, or divest it. And then all of a sudden he was for it. Now I get it. It's kind of what you're describing. Is I think he was so screwed over, if I may say, by Facebook and Meta and Alphabet.
They kicked him out, right? Out of the account.
Yes, that's right. That's right. He got after January 6th, he did get kicked out. I mean, it's hard. Thank you for reminding me. It's so, and me too, as an individual, I had to edit my content, what I said on X because it was
still doing it.
I did.
I'm still when I upload on YouTube, I have to. Is this okay?
We're traumatized. You couldn't talk about gender stuff. You couldn't talk about election stuff. You couldn't talk. But
it doesn't happen with the left wing. The Democratic Party doesn't have to worry about whatever they spew out there. They talk about our transgender, our children, cutting off their dicks. And
I think that's changing. I think it's. And I don't think they should be censored either. I think they should have it out there. But we need to have our voice as well. But regarding TikTok, it is being gamed. It is being gamed by even if temporarily or in certain situations, it looks like you have a better voice as a conservative. The CCP is gaming it, and the best, most graphic example was during the Gaza war. Okay, after October 7th, it
that's
was
when people woke up.
Yeah, it was like 95% pro Gaza content, 5% pro Israel content, and there's just no way that was real. You know what I mean? And so therefore, if there is, hopefully not, if there ever is a military conflict between the U.S. and China, they would let out the floodgates and propagandize all the young people, and it would be a mess.
So that's why a lot of campus protests, we don't see it anymore, because Trump threatened that if he finds any anti-Israel, anti-Semitic messages on their social media, they would research it and kick them out. Right. And I think that didn't balance out with the Biden administration, right? So you don't see these protests anymore.
That's right, but I think specifically they were saying, I think it would be wrong to do that to an American citizen. They need to be able to say what they need to say as long as they're not committing violence or vandalism, whatever. That was the foreign students who, here on visas.
I know, it's crazy. They kicked out the Chinese student, right? At UCLA a couple days ago, right?
Yes, it was a Chinese student, though, that was a pro-Gaza student. They need to probably kick out some students for pro-CCP activities, too.
They don't do that much.
That's a whole other can of worms, but no, the Trump era, I think, people are waking up, and these platforms, I hope, are opening up.
In all honesty, I talked with my conservative friends. What they said is it's about picking our enemies. Is China being better to us, or is a Western deep state better to us? And then a lot of them choose, you know what? I think probably China's better than the Western deep state. These, the deep staters who have been suppressing not just Google, Facebook, and all these entities, but even the media. They feel like they're attacked all over the place. China, they at least TikTok, they gave us an outlet. Do you think they had this kind of a line of thinking is dangerous?
I sympathize. Again, I'm having traumatic stress disorder like you. I have to remember back to when we were.
I'm still suffering. You're right.
I know. No, me too. But no. China is a unique bad in the world. The communists, we are very lucky here. Very soft corruption here. Very soft censorship here compared to China. China is. I was in China in August last year. I was on a special delegation of sort of like staff, some congressional staff and some think tank staff. We met with economic folks, with political leaders, other think tanks. And as soon as we landed in the country, you felt this thing on your back. You just felt you were being watched at all times. And of course we were. We had our handlers. We cameras everywhere.
Cameras.
Yes. I was almost like, it was a cluster of like 10 cameras everywhere, and I'm like, they
surveil people, right?
Of course they do.
So
but I was even thinking, there's so many cameras there. They can't need that many. They're not pointing in that many directions. They're just there to intimidate too, because you see so many cameras. You're right.
Automatically you it's not like you edit yourself on YouTube. You have to edit your entire behavior once you go to China.
It affects your whole nature. And that was the scariest thing, is I was thinking, okay, these 1.4 billion people that live there their whole lives is a fake. Their whole lives is a performance for the cameras, right? Because if they, for the cameras, for the credit system, for other ways that their information is circulating, right? But like, that's their whole life, and they can't get out of it. So no, please, everyone should be very happy that they're here. I don't care if we're censored a little bit. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay. So the social credit score, those are all real. And I heard that they don't use cash anymore in China. Is that real? So, because
Yes.
I hear a lot of pro-Chinese people saying that, those are fake news and a conspiracy theory.
No.
Well,
So our handlers in China on several occasions said, oh, why are you paying? I think I didn't use a credit card because our group that we were with took care of the payments, but they were paying in cash because they didn't want to be involved in that system.
Okay.
And our guides were saying, oh, we have WeChat. We can just pay, or WePay or whatever. You should get that. And we're like,
No.
We don't want to get that. We're not going to get that. So, I mean, even here, that is something I think we should be concerned with because effectively we do have a corporate credit score. It is a little intrusive. But in China, once you get in that system, you are your whole life, your genetics, that's another important thing that, for example, the House China Select Committee is looking at genetic information. Chinese genetic corporations that come into the United States that gather that information to make health technologies and just have more information on us.
Okay, so you were at American First Policy Institute,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So all the studies that you do about China, I mean, I know that Trump is on top of a lot of things too. Do you report it to the White House, or does it go to President Trump?
Well, of course.
Because I don't think he can, zero in on it because he's so busy. So.
Well, listen, I was just talking to my colleague Fred Fleitz, who does foreign policy at AFPI, and we were saying, someone was asking, what does Trump think about the Korean situation? And we said, unfortunately, he probably doesn't know anything yet because there's too much going on.
That's what I heard.
He's focusing on Ukraine and Gaza right now. So, but no, for the vast majority of AFPI's existence, we were under the Biden administration. So this is all new to us. I mean, we have former employees who have recently gone into the administration. We flag it and send it when appropriate to the appropriate agency, right? If there's we did some work on Chinese migrants coming over the border and that sort of thing. That would go to DHS. We don't have a direct line to the president. Let's put it that way. Our goal and our purpose is to publish this information so that everyone has it. Mm-hmm. Whether that be national leaders and policymakers, state policymakers, media. Our information is for everyone.
From the grassroots to all the way to the top as you can go.
That's correct.
Okay, so with China, do you believe that China is actively being involved in other nations' election system?
I have to say I'm not that educated on it, but for sure the way they're involved is through propaganda. Okay, and that gets back to the TikTok. I don't have any particular examples or proof that they've done that, but why wouldn't they? That is a very potent tool for tens of millions of people, either who are of age to vote or are, let's say, influencers in that young set. I know in South Korea this has been alleged. I'm not educated enough on that to comment, but let's just put it this way. China throws around its influence in any way it can. Economically, bribing, especially in the third world. I assume that they also apply this to elections.
The One Belt, One Road initiative by CCP is the ultimate goal to take over the world?
That's a little, I don't know if it's exactly that. I don't know if they'd even say they need to. What they just need to do is to enrich themselves to make sure they're the top power in the world. I don't know if they want to, well, let's say not in the sense of conquest, okay? But yes, they want to grab all the resources in the world, all the minerals or the rare earth metals, the fuels. They want that all to come to China. Frankly, they probably want to rebuild the Middle Kingdom, right? Because in the past, China didn't necessarily hold a lot of empire in the sense of territory, but it assumed everyone would sort of bring tribute to it.
Yeah, got it. Because I hear from people who are sympathetic to China saying that's not true, that they never talk about trying to spread their influence, but that's also incorrect.
That's the entire core of what they do. But I mean, they set these goals. I mean, the Belt and Road is an official program, and the Belt and Road is explicitly to facilitate natural resources and trade to come to China.
So if you're at CCP, obviously they didn't want Trump to be president. So there has been some theories that how could COVID happen in March? The pandemic lockdown happened in March of 2020. Coincidentally, an election year. It seems like the whole world was trying to bring down Trump with the deep state, the media, and China too. And somehow that worked, but Trump came back. So why did TikTok then allow conservatives to be there? That if they're CCP, I don't think they wanted Trump to be back. Why do you think they allowed it? Or did they use that loophole where they saw a lot of people leaving Facebook and Instagram, and they just caught that who was a trickle-down effect, so to speak.
I lean more towards that. I think that the CCP is conniving, is effective at certain things, but generally they're slow to react, and I think it is mostly opportunism. So going back to COVID, I absolutely believe it was created in a lab. It was meant to be either studied or weaponized.
A biochemical?
Yes,
weapon?
by biological weapon. Studied by China, but
Fauci being involved too, you believe, with a gain of
I better not go. That's not my expertise. But I'll just say that I don't think the spread of it to the rest of the world, including the United States, was a premeditated plan. I believe it was released. China was going to be screwed, and China said, "Well, we better export this. We better make the rest of the world sick." And they allowed flights to go from China to the rest of the world while closing flights in the.
They did. They actually did.
And so I think that happened to coincide with the U.S. election. It was very bad for Trump. I think the CCP preferred Biden to Trump. They would have preferred him in, but I don't think they were thinking that far ahead. I don't think they were that COVID was a specific thing on Trump. And to bring it back around to TikTok, I don't think. It was thought out that well as far as are we favoring conservatives or liberals? I think it was opportunistic as far as getting more customers.
And Trump, I think Trump in one of his speeches said that because of the COVID situation, I mean, he said he had a good relationship with President Xi. Our trade deficit towards China was decreasing, I think, I understand, during the first term before pandemic hit, and it kind of skyrocketed back again. And he said that, but China, they crossed the river, and I think it at a point of no return. He was kind of saying along that rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that the trade deficit that America has against China, what is it now? Is it like trillions of dollars at this point?
Not
like
trillions, hundreds of billions.
Is that cumulatively?
No, that's annually.
Annually, well, so cumulatively, it's in the trillions,
yes.
right?
Uh-huh. Yes.
So do you think in his second term we can drastically cut these deficits towards China?
I think we can. And, people are surprised. So he came out with those 25% tariffs against Canada and Mexico,
yes.
at least threatened. I think, and only 10%
yes.
against China.
So comparatively, it's like, what is this?
That's correct. But I think correctly, the Mexico and Canada ones were simply meant as a stick to make them, and as you see, they did come to the table and they are talking.
Yeah.
China's a different animal. China, if you put a 25%, 50%, 60%, and I think he may get there, that would involve a completely remaking kind of world trade or remaking of the Chinese system. They really can't do that right off the bat. So I think it's ingenious what he's doing. The 10%, he's tying it directly to fentanyl. He says, act on fentanyl and then we can take this off. So it's a slow ratcheting up. It gives them a chance to respond. And their responses were not really a trade war. They were relatively restrained at this moment. There were some import restrictions. There was an investigation into some of our tech companies. But we're both staying moderate, and I think that's the genius thing. As we ramp it up, we'll start eating into that trade deficit, or China will come to the table and have another trade deal.
And Chinese companies, they were using a loophole, right? They were kind of making like 80%, 90% here, and then bring it to Mexico and finish up the last part of the assembly, and then sending it to the States.
Yes, I mean, I think they were really just starting to ramp that up because of the third country. As long as what you're saying, as long as a certain amount of it is transformed in the third country, it counts as a good of Mexico or something like that. I've read, though, they were building up some EV plants and other plants on the border there. They're ramping it down a little bit because they're concerned that Trump will, there's a renegotiation of the USMCA, the North America Free Trade Agreement, and they're concerned that Trump is going to put more tariffs on Mexico, and therefore moving those Chinese factories to Mexico isn't going to help. So it's like a cat and mouse, or it's like, blocking one, it's like plugging one hole.
Exactly.
But you know what? It's better to do that and figure it out and find a solution rather than just saying,
So Trump, during his rally, it wasn't just China. I'm talking about way back when he first ran. And currently now, he talked about something that other politicians don't, manufacturing. I never heard a current politician in our era talk about manufacturing. I thought that was long gone story. We give it to these other developing countries. but he wants America to be a manufacturing superhouse.
Yeah.
Is that too big of a dream, or is that a possible scenario, or is it more realistic to switch our trading partners, manufacturing powerhouse like China, and move that to India or Mexico or other nations? What is the best?
I think the
option?
last one is more realistic, or at least a mix. Okay, we can bring some back to America, but I think some of that manufacturing will never be cost effective again in America, regardless of the amount of tariff you put on it. So yes, we have to do things like nearshoring, like we're saying in Mexico, friendshoring. Vietnam is a friend, not an enemy. Let's put it that way. And Southeast Asia, diversify our supply, because as long as China has a chokehold on these manufactured goods, just like they do on critical minerals and many other elements, they have full control over that market, the pricing, the supply, and a lot of complaints now coming out of the U.S. and Europe is that China has overproduced and they're flooding the markets, and this is absolutely true. They produce so much more as a rule than they can consume within China, and it distorts the entire world. So we need to get it out, wherever it is, out.
Seems like China has a lot of rare minerals.
Correct.
Is that why Trump is trying to get territorial impact on Greenland, so to speak, to even it out?
Absolutely.
China think it's necessary.
Yes.
We have to deal with Greenland.
Well, I'm not going to make a definitive statement on whether we should directly have Greenland, but that's why he's doing it. And there definitely are mineral deposits in Greenland. We need more of a defense and resource presence there. I don't know if we need to own it. I'll leave that to others. But China controls 80 to 90% across the board of critical mineral supplies and refining. And so even an example, Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo has almost all the cobalt. So they'll mine the cobalt. It all gets shipped to China. It gets refined in China. And it's a totally black box. No one knows what the price really should be, what the stockpiles are, so China can just distribute it out whenever it wants and completely destroy new operations that are trying to build up. Australia is trying to mine cobalt. Finland has some cobalt. They're not able to do it in a price effective way because China can undermine that price at any time. They have a full chokehold. It's terrible, and that's one example.
Yeah, when they start to dump, and that has a tremendously negative impact.
Yes.
In South Korea, a lot of people have been awakening to the fact of the influence that the CCP had over South Korea, not just politics, but in entertainment, in all faction of life. And right now, currently, as you may already know, South Korean President Yoon is facing impeachment. There's a constitutional court decision coming in March, early March or mid-March. And a lot of conservatives right now, they're pretty depressed and they're angered at the same time. We want to hear some encouraging words from you since you're a China expert. And any last words you want to have to our audience, including how can we find your work?
Sure.
There's a three-part question.
I mean, listen, I'm not intimately aware of the mechanisms going on right now with you and that situation. I need to educate myself more, and I will do so. I will say generally, yes, China's influence politically, economically, and otherwise is felt everywhere. I can't, in your region where you're so close, I would not doubt the fact that they either, much like the COVID disease, that whether or not they were the initiators of this problem, they for sure are taking advantage of it.
Did.
And I'm sure they're very happy that Yoon is under siege. Sorry, anything else you want?
Just anything, any encouraging words that you can give, and also where they can find your work at America First Policy Institute.
The encouraging words I can give you is that the American political spectrum is waking up to China. Almost everyone understands that this is a threat. As you pointed out, back around the year 2000, everyone thought, oh, this will be a wonderful thing for our companies. They'll learn democracy and we'll be friends and whatever. No one is under that illusion right now. No one in the mainstream of political discourse. So what we have to agree on is the strategies. How do we fight back, right? And it's going to take a whole of society approach. One place to look is the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. They come out with policies, hearings, papers seems like every week. They're doing a great thing, but again, this comes down to education. This comes down to protecting agricultural land, protecting infrastructure, military bases, building up our military, building up our shipbuilding capacity, military and commercial, dealing with export controls to stop our highest technologies from going to China. Listen, the issues are almost endless. The core we need to understand: the CCP is a malign regime. The CCP means to displace the United States as the leader.
Yeah.
And on the way to that, it'll crush any other democracy, including South Korea, as a way to undermine the democratic world.
And we should control their like real estate purchasing, right? That's what's happening in the States. Right?
That's another thing, and I'll tell you, yeah. So to find our work, it's AmericaFirstPolicy.com, and one of our signature issues is protecting real estate in the United States. So you think food supply, you think agricultural land, you think land near military installations and infrastructure such as dams, electricity facilities, and whatnot. There's many cases where Chinese nationals, and again, any Chinese business or billionaire is effectively part of the CCP. They will come in and acquire that land. That is a major security threat. So that's another hole that we need to plug.
Thank you very much, Adam, for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.